Well, today on Sales Confessions, we're joined by Ellis Talton. He's the SVP of Go-to-Market at Briq, where he's leading the charge to bring AI-powered digital workers into finance, ops, HR, and risk, starting with construction, but not stopping there. Ellis didn't start in SaaS. He's another one of these really interesting backgrounds where he's been a journalist, a founder, a country director in Central Africa, and even speaks French. Et ça fait vraiment plaisir. Parfait. À tous nos écouteurs, tous nos auditeurs français, aujourd'hui c'est pour vous. Ellis, welcome to Sales Confessions. Are you ready to confess?
I'm ready to confess, Francis. Put me in the booth. I'm ready.
Love it. Awesome.
As we were talking before, this is a great exercise. If to go through and ask and come up with your own confession, and it's more challenging than folks might think. So, Francis, my confession: Briq was founded in 2019, and like many companies out there today, we grew when at the height of the tech world, SaaS raised a lot of money. One of the big mistakes we made was throwing bodies at problems, and we really layered up before we built the foundation. I mean, it's easy to do. It's very exciting. It's this idea of growth at all costs. We added middle management. We grew sales enablement teams. As we added, more account executives, we added more managers. As we added more managers, we added more enablement. And towards a couple of years ago, we kind of came to the realization that it actually made problems worse. The problem was that we were too far removed from the problems at the front lines. And I think when you build middle layers really without thinking through your process, problems get abstracted and decisions don't cascade very easily. And I think the mistake we made is that we thought management meant more control, but it actually means less control. And it was, it's difficult to unwind that. I'm certainly curious, I think we see a lot of companies today out there, Amazon famously being one of them, where they're talking about middle management. There is this question of, if you're new into the role, having a great manager makes a huge difference earlier in your career, for sure. I don't think, though, that if you're, let's say you're a growing company and you're starting today and you're building your go-to-market team, I would really encourage leaders to think twice, because really you're not trying to scale headcount, you're trying to scale clarity of the problem and of the solution. And so that was a big learning moment. And so anytime we kind of think about adding headcount, it's really tempting to want to add layers. Really tempting, because it's, managing people is hard. It's a really important thing to do. But I think it's, how do you think through using the tools that are out there? Certainly, Francis, I've listened to some of the other episodes of Sales Confessions, and people are talking about AI SDRs, which I don't know how much management they need, AI sales enablement, AI sales managers. I think that's really where, if you're thinking of growing your teams, think in that direction rather than, or if you are going to add headcount, really make sure that you have a structure in place to get problems, challenges from the customers and from buyers to leadership as fast as possible.
Yeah, I love it. And I know during the first time we spoke, you mentioned something that was really interesting, was that at the end of the day, when you're building the team, the only thing that matters is velocity. Velocity is the only metric that matters. And so the question should be, is what I'm doing helping information propagate faster, or is it slowing it down? And I think one of the observations is that in most cases, when you start adding more layers, then information doesn't propagate as fast. And so you're kind of hindering velocity. There are some cases where having management will actually help propagate information faster. I think that's when it's the right trigger to bring in this kind of middle layer. I thought that was a really interesting element around how velocity is the one metric that matters.
Yeah, I mean, I think, look, from a leadership perspective, you think about you still, measure what matters. And just because, there are new technologies and AI and tools, I don't think it means you have to throw out the baby with the bathwater. There are playbooks around building teams that can still function today. Certainly, maybe it's fewer people you're adding on. I think measuring, for us at Briq, deal velocity is a thing that we measure really quickly, and time in stage, and measuring, for example, how long from the time an invite is sent to the time that the prospect accepts it. I mean, those are like getting to down to those details when you think about deal velocity is like really how do you measure those items enough when you start to see lags in the deals. And if you really understand your sales stages, you really understand your ICP, you have real clarity on your sales methodology and how you sell the product or the technology, then you know how to diagnose where those problems are happening. Yeah, velocity is a key.
Yeah. Yeah, I really love the idea of thinking like if you remove this layer, does it increase the velocity or does it, reduce it? And that should be like the key to decide like do you need this additional layer or not. But I have to jump into this, right? You were talking about deal stages and all of this. And when we were off air, you had a really interesting hot take, and we're going to use this to inaugurate a new segment in the show, which is hot takes. So what is your hot take?
Okay, hot take. Discovery calls are dead. You hear this all the time in sales. Focus on a good discovery. How do I run a good discovery call? And we at Briq, as a sales process, we used to run a lot of discovery calls. And what we discovered through that process is that, the point of view is the product that we bring to those calls, right? What the insights that we bring is more valuable than what we discover in those calls from a customer's perspective, right? From a buyer's perspective. And so what we do is rather than going in and saying, hey, tell me about all your problems, we go into those calls and we say, here are the problems that you have. I know your problems. We call it mind reading, right? And I think in order to do that well, you really have to know your ICP. You really have to know your personas. I think a lot of buyers in some ways are the same. I mean, we talk to general contractors. In a lot of ways, it's very similar with sales leaders. You have too much to do and not enough people, not enough time to do it in. And so, we've adopted the challenger sales model. I don't know, Francis, are you familiar with challenger sales?
Yes.
Where we stop calling it a discovery call and we call it a vision alignment call. We go in and we say, there's we call it the reframe. There's a new way to think about the world. The way you're doing things are broken. It can be very uncomfortable at times, but it's not us asking what are your problems. It's here's what's wrong with your process, and here's why you need not just a product, but you need someone that shares that vision, like us, like a partner, right? So it shifts, and so when you measure that, in the old days when we would measure discovery, those first discovery calls, if the rep is speaking 75% of the time, we would flag that as a problem. Today, that is the metric we met. You should be speaking at least 70% of the time. And there should be a calendar invite happening within 7 to 14 days that gets accepted by the prospect. If you're speaking 75% of the time and you're not getting to next meetings, there's a problem. Let's listen to the talk track. But you really need to be spending time digging into knowing what their problems are and presenting it that way. Now, it doesn't mean you can't ask questions, obviously. I do think, there is a time and place for asking a question, but I find that buyers get, that very first call, they should come out with some value and a new way of thinking about the world.
I love it. And so if someone was thinking about implementing this at their company, like how do you weave in, like when does the information gathering happen? So of course, like when you're positioning, when you're doing the vision alignment, you are going to ask questions along with, presenting how you see the world. Is there does the call need to be a bit longer to make sure that you can capture a lot of the questions that would be asked otherwise? Do you do that async? Do you do another call? Like what would you recommend as best practice there?
Yeah, I'm a big fan of kind of the call between the calls. I think being able to pick up the phone, after a presentation or you might be doing a demo with a lot of people in the room. I like to ask my questions between the calls. That's what we always encourage. I can speak from experience. I remember we were asking a prospect about their questions on a demo, and I could tell that the prospect was really uncomfortable because in a way it's calling their baby ugly. I mean, their process was bad. They had no system in place. It was a mess and it wasn't adding value. And it was kind of embarrassing because there was a lot of people on that call that he was kind of being exposed in a way, and it was not a good experience for that buyer. I find that the questions around like, hey, how much time are you spending on this process? If you could do this better, what impact would it have on the business? If you were able to identify opportunities 30 days faster, what impact would that have on the business? Those questions I find in those, what we call the challenge, the vision calls, we ask two questions at the very end. We say, is there a business process where you're spending multiple hours a week on? And the answer is usually yes. And then we ask, if you could cut that down by 80%, what impact would it have on the business? Not would that have an impact on the business, but rather what impact would that have on the business? And so that opens up an entire world of conversation. And then that you leave on a high note, right? Because then they're thinking about the future state and what could be. So I think, it's not a question of like the number of questions you ask. It's like asking the right question at the right time.
Yeah, it's getting the right information. That makes sense. Super helpful. One of the questions that we like to ask to people who join the podcast is like, what kind of AI are you implementing in your sales process? And given how AI centric the company is, I'm sure there's a lot of places, but what is like one area where you feel, you've learned how to use AI in the sales process and you think other people should investigate more into that?
Yeah, I think, there's a tool that we use called N8N. I don't think it's a secret to probably a lot of go-to-market folks, but the letter N, the number 8, the letter N, N8N.
Horrible to pronounce, by the way.
I don't know. I think that's how you pronounce it. I'm not sure, but it's memorable for sure. I think one of the things that we did is over the last year as well is that we cut a lot of spend on software. And I think a lot of companies are in the same boat, cutting Gong, cutting outreach. We even went down from 75 seats in Salesforce to 1 seat. We cut about $250,000 in software spend. And what we found is that we're able to use, this is on the marketing side as well, Marketo, Visible, all the attribution stuff. And we're able to use essentially workflow automation tools that we weren't quite able to do with Zapier. I think N8N is a bit more technical, and large language models that we weren't able to do before. One of them is email outreach. So we have a program that runs where when a visitor comes to our website, we identify who that visitor is. We've used RB2B before. I think RB2B is a great tool. And we generate an email to that person based on their LinkedIn. We also take the company and we look at the hiring page of that company and we detect the roles that they're hiring for. Now, there are tools that do this kind of natively, Clearbit maybe being one of them, but this was a very cheap way to do this. And then we create an email sequence personalized using Claude based on those profiles. We also look at the account and we look at the target personas from that account, and we also add them, do the same process, generate the emails, add them to sequence. So if it's, let's say, someone lower down in the business, a manager, but we target the CEO, CFO, COO, we'll include that manager in a sequence, but we'll also add target personas into sequences as well. Now that's something that our BDR team was doing manually. We had an entire team whose job it was to go and build those sequences and keep them full and manage them. Today, that has done just something completely automatic, and so that's on the marketing side. We found a lot of success on some of those workflows. Where we want to go next certainly is on the sales side. Listening to the calls. Was this a good challenger sales call? Is this customer vision aligned? Did we, accurately portray the idea of a robot on this call? Those are the things that we're replicating that middle layer. On the sales side, we're working on. But the marketing side's we've found the most success.
Love it. Again, like for people who want to, implement something like this, who was in charge of vetting, writing the prompt, and so writing the prompt and then vetting the output email before they get sent?
Yeah, this is a really interesting question. So it was a combination of myself and an automation engineer, a freelance person that we hired. I forget who it was. They posted a job. It's a big SaaS company. I forget the name. They said any job in the business, we will hire an automation engineer for. Any job, sales, marketing, customer success, whatever it is. I think there's a new role that we'll start to see in SaaS is AI operations. We hear about RevOps, we hear about marketing ops. I think it's AI ops is the next role that needs to be created that looks across the entire business, not just in sales and marketing, but across the entire kind of customer journey that has to know, workflow design, business process, that has to know, is relatively technical developer and has to know prompt engineering. It's a very unique role that in our business, we have a lot of very smart people at Briq that nobody would had all three. And so we kind of had to kind of cobble that together. But I think the idea of an AI operations, if you're new in your career in RevOps, I would say, my advice would be become that person, the AI operations person, because it's an invaluable role to have, not just in sales and marketing, but customer success, support, any areas of the business that are even not super technical.
Makes sense. I think one of the really interesting parts about this answer is that there was an SVP who was reading the output of the emails and giving feedback to someone to then update the prompts and things like that, where I find like a lot of companies hope that, SDRs or maybe like people that are a little bit lower in the org might be able to do that. I think that's one of the reasons why a lot of the AI SDR initiatives fail, is that there isn't enough buy-in, commitment, and work put in by some of the leaders who really understand the vision of the company, the positioning, who can be critical about what an email to a CEO should look like. It can't just be like, question for you, Ellis. Right. It's like, that's just not going to fly. And so I think that's it's really interesting to hear that.
Yeah, I think the role of the leader in SaaS these days from a go-to-market side is, it's always used to be like you're a manager of managers, and I think that is just completely wrong these days. I think your job is to create clarity. It always has been, by the way, and I think we forgot that. And then the leadership side, if creating clarity means reading emails that an LLM prompt has generated and refining those emails, that is your job that day. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And that's super valuable, because it also, what's interesting about that is like the process of going through the validation of those emails and the critique of those emails actually can lead to some revealing some disagreements potentially between like different leaders. I found that that's a really interesting thing when you bring those emails to the leadership team and then you realize, oh, actually this person has a slightly different perspective on like what is the value prop, on how to pitch it. And the exercise of having like as an alignment exercise, I think it's really interesting.
Yeah, 100%. And which, by the way, in a world of layers and middle management would never have surfaced.
Correct.
Right.
Love it.
Yeah.
Well, thanks a ton for sharing this. I know we're at time and you have an important sales call. Good luck with that.
Right, we're going to go do some challenging.
Absolutely.
Right,
but yeah.
Thanks for having me on. It was really interesting, and love the Sales Confessions content. Keep them coming. I'm looking forward to listening to more over the next rest of the year.
Absolutely.
I've learned a lot from them.
Well, thanks a ton for confessing, and until next time, take care.
My pleasure. Take care.